The cryptography portion of the CISSP exam is one that is both famous and feared as the most technical subject on the exam, and one that requires large amounts of memorization. So by your request, in this supplemental video in our CISSP Exam Cram series, we're going to drill down on cryptography in the CISSP context, focusing on what the study guides say you need to know. And along the way, I'll share some memory devices that will help you commit to mind those figures you may need to recall on the big day. Our focus in this session is just the subject of cryptography as covered in the CISSP exam, the most technical topic on the CISSP. And I have some very specific objectives for you in this session. So our goals, number one, I want to make sure you understand the terminology and the concepts around cryptography. There are definitely some technical details around encryption algorithms, etc., that are going to be very important. And warning, there's some memorization ahead. Fortunately, I have for you some memory devices, some tables, some techniques to make this process easier. And in this area, I'll just warn you, you're going to see some content that you might have seen in the Domain 3 video, but there's some very important net new content here as well. Let me explain. So we're going to talk about the differences between these algorithm types. We'll also talk about their common usage, as well as how they are used together. On the subject of differences, when we understand the differences between algorithms, their strengths and weaknesses relative to one another, it's going to answer one very important question for you. Why is that type of algorithm used for that specific function? And the bottom line is, when we put this knowledge together, it's going to give you the foundational knowledge you need to select the right answers on the exam. So when you see a question that mentions fast cryptography, you're going to know that's probably symmetric. When you see a question around key length and you see a hashing function as one of your answers, you're going to know that's not an answer because a hash doesn't need a key. It's a one-way operation. All this is going to become very clear in the next few minutes. So there's a PDF copy of the presentation in the video download. Do make sure you hit the bell so you get a heads up every time we drop a video. And if you like what you're getting here, give us a thumbs up. It really helps with the YouTube algorithm. So let's talk cryptography. So codes versus ciphers. So code are systems of symbols that sometimes imply secret, but don't always have to be secret. Don't always provide confidentiality. Ciphers, on the other hand, are meant to hide the true meaning of a message. So codes are sometimes secret, but don't always provide confidentiality. Ciphers are always secret. Confidentiality is always going to be implied there. So you do need to know the types of ciphers that are out there. So stream cipher, number one, a symmetric key cipher. In a stream cipher, your plain text digit is encrypted one at a time. It's a stream, so to speak, because it's not a block of data. So where a stream cipher goes one character at a time, a block cipher will apply the key and algorithm to a block of data, like 64 contiguous bits, for example. So basically as a group rather than one bit at a time. So that's the fundamental difference between a stream cipher and a block cipher. Substitution. So this is a random bit string. It's basically the same length as the block size that's XORed in the message. So transposition. So transposition, to transpose something means to rearrange. And that's the easy way to remember this, is a transposition cipher is going to rearrange the letters of a plain text message, forming a ciphertext message. An initialization vector is also a random bit string. It's an XOR operation that uses the same key length as the block size. So the two things you're remembering here is with initialization vector, it's an XOR with the message, and it's the same length as the block size. I'll explain what XOR is in just a moment, so stick with me if you don't know exactly what that is. I'll clear that up for you in the next few. But with initialization vectors, it's going to create a unique cipher text every time the same message is encrypted with the same key. So the Caesar Visionaire and the one-time pad. These are all stream ciphers. The difference between these ciphers is their key length. So stream cipher, different key length. So Caesar is going to be a key length of 1. And if you think about Caesar back in the day, he was number 1, so key length of 1, it adds up. The Visionaire cipher uses a longer key. It's usually a word or a sentence. And then the one-time pad uses a key length that's as long as the message itself. So Caesar is 1, Visionaire is a word or a sentence, and the key length in a one-time pad is the same length as the message itself. Now we need to talk a bit more about one-time pad. I do expect you're going to see at least a question on this on the exam. So for a one-time pad to be successful, the key must be generated randomly without any known pattern. And it has to be at least as long as the message to be encrypted, because remember, that's what differentiates one-time pad from Visionaire and Caesar. So the key is the same size as the message itself. And the pads must be protected against physical disclosure. You can't give away the secret, right? And each pad must be used only one time and then discarded, because repetition could reveal the answer, right? So basically all of these must be true for a one-time pad to be successful. So a concept here, zero knowledge proof. So this is a communication concept, and basically zero knowledge proof is a specific type of information that's exchanged, but no data is actually transferred. This is true with digital signatures and digital certificates. So what the heck does that mean? Let me give it to you in plain English. To just put it simply, zero knowledge proof enables one to prove knowledge of a fact without revealing the fact itself. So that's, in effect, what digital signatures and certificates allow us to do. Split knowledge. So split knowledge means that the information of the privilege required to perform an operation is divided amongst multiple users. That makes sense, right? Splitting the knowledge amongst multiple people. So this ensures that no single person has sufficient privileges to compromise the security of the environment. It's separation of the knowledge, of the privilege. I kind of think of split knowledge as role separation of a fashion, really. We talk about role separation in the workplace, so one person doesn't have too much privilege that they can carry out some sort of internal threat all on their own. Another concept, work function, sometimes called work factor. So this is a way to measure the strength of a cryptography system by measuring the effort in terms of cost and or time to decrypt the message. So that the cost or time to decrypt the message speaks to the value of the function. So usually the time and effort required to perform a complete brute force attack against an encryption system is what a work function rating represents. So the security and protection offered by the system is directly proportional to the value of the work function or factor. Would you like that in plain English? I hear you. It's the time and effort required to break a protective measure. That's the work factor. So when you hear work function or work factor, think time and effort required to break a protective measure. So the importance of key security. So cryptographic keys provide a necessary element of secrecy, and modern systems utilize keys that are at least 128 bits long to provide adequate security. And that number is going to increase over time. In fact, when we see the rise of quantum computing as a mainstream capability, that's going to change everything about cryptography. We're going to see a massive shift in this space. But know that 128 bits is our low watermark, so to speak, when it comes to key length in modern cryptography. So symmetric versus asymmetric cryptography. So symmetric relies on the use of a shared key. So a shared key versus asymmetric, where we have public-private key pairs for communication between parties. So the difference between the two, number one, symmetric key lacks support for scalability. It's not easy to distribute the key because we only have one key. How do you transmit that key secretly, confidentially between two people? And we don't have a way to implement non-repudiation there, so we can't guarantee the source of the message. Now, asymmetric, on the other hand, basically gives us that capability to implement a solution that guarantees we know who that message came from, but it also makes it easy to distribute that key amongst many parties because we have private and public key pairs to work with. Stick with me, and here in about 5 minutes we'll actually walk through an asymmetric example so you can see how the public-private key pairs are used in a scenario to implement non-repudiation, but also to transmit data confidentially. But symmetric cryptography is going to be faster since we have that shared key. Asymmetric is going to be stronger and more scalable, generally speaking. So when you think symmetric, that's single shared key and it's faster, and asymmetric is a private-public key pair that's going to be stronger than asymmetric, so to speak. So confidentiality, integrity, and non-repudiation are three concepts you'll definitely need to know for the exam. So confidentiality is really focused on the secrecy of data, both while it's in rest or while it's in transit. Integrity basically provides the recipient with an assurance that the data wasn't altered, that the integrity of the data remains, that the data we received is the data that was sent, in other words. And non-repudiation gives us undeniable proof that the sender of a message is the one who actually authored it. It basically prevents the sender from subsequently denying that they sent the original message, which is fantastic in certain circumstances. So you need to be able to explain the 5 basic operational modes of data encryption standard, DES and triple DES. So I'm going to cover these for you in a way that I hope is easier for you to remember, because just looking at them on the surface, they're not just super easy to remember. They don't stand out. So the first is electronic codebook mode. So this is the least secure of the lot. And with codebook mode, it processes a 64-bit block. The problem is, if it encounters the same block multiple times, it produces the same encrypted block, which makes it easy to break. So I like to say this codebook is pretty easy reading. Cipher block chaining. In cipher block chaining, each block of encrypted text is XORed with the block of ciphertext immediately preceding, so the previous link in the chain, so to speak. Cipher feedback is basically cipher block chaining in a streaming version. It's going to work on the data in real time in memory, but do remember, when chaining is involved, errors will propagate. That's a key factor to associate with cipher block chaining and cipher feedback, is when they use chaining, errors propagate. But cipher feedback is basically cipher block chaining in a streaming version working in memory buffers. Now the next one, output feedback, works a lot like cipher feedback, but it XORs the plain text with a seed value, which means we're not using chaining anymore. It's using a seed value instead of that immediately preceding ciphertext. So no chaining means errors don't propagate in this case. And then another variation of that is counter, which uses an increment and counter instead of a seed. And again, using that increment and counter is pretty easy to tie to that fifth mode. And then how is triple DES different? Well, triple DES runs DES 3 times with 2 or 3 keys, different keys, to increase the effective key size to 112 or 168 bits, respectively. All right, so I told you we'd talk about XOR. Let's talk about XOR. This is exclusive OR option, or XOR. It's also called binary addition sometimes. It's used pretty heavily in cryptology. It actually sounds a lot more complicated than it really is. It's basically a function of flipping bits in a simple systematic fashion. So if you look at my table here, we have the original value and the key value and then the cipher value. So what you're seeing here is when the binary values match, we get a 0, and otherwise it's going to be 1. So 1 and 1 matches, we get a 0. So key clustering is a weakness in cryptography where a plain text message generates identical ciphertext messages using the same algorithm, but using different keys. Tell you how I remember this one. I think of key cluster as being similar to collisions in hashing. So hashes have a collision when two different strings produce the same hash. Collisions are exactly why MD5 isn't used as a hashing algorithm anymore. So with key clustering, basically it's when two different keys using the same algorithm produce the same ciphertext. So it's similar to collision in that respect. So let's start by talking about the most basic difference between symmetric and asymmetric cryptography. So your symmetric algorithms use a single shared key between your sender and recipient. We'll talk about the advantages and disadvantages of that later, but symmetric, we have a single shared key. In asymmetric cryptography, sometimes called public key cryptography, we have different keys. We have a public key and then a private key, which is unshared. And both sender and recipient will each have a private key, and neither will share their own private key. We're going to peel back the layers of the onion in this session, but start with that. So now we're going to talk asymmetric cryptography, or public key cryptography. So on the asymmetric side of cryptography, you have public keys that are going to be shared amongst communicating parties. So if you and I are going to communicate and share secrets, you can see you have access to my public key and I have access to yours. My private key is secret. Only I know my private key, and in your case, only you know yours. And in terms of data, to encrypt a message, each can use the recipient's public key. So I can use your public key to encrypt a message, and then you can decrypt it using your own private key. And with a digital signature to sign a message, you're going to use your own private key, which gives us non-repudiation. It ensures that if I digitally sign a message with my private key, it ensures that it was sent by me. And to validate a signature, you'll use my public key. So asymmetric and symmetric can work together in the sense that, remember, symmetric cryptography is fast, right? So we can use asymmetric cryptography to securely transmit the shared key we're going to use in symmetric cryptography. So essentially, asymmetric solves three problems, one of which is distribution of a secret. And with symmetric, that's a problem, right? Sharing that key amongst many parties on the symmetric side would be really difficult, so that's where asymmetric can help out. So just remember, each party has both a private and public key. So let's look at a simple example. We have Franco and Maria. So Franco sends a request to Maria requesting her public key. Maria sends her public key back to Franco. Remember, your public key is shared with all, and Franco is going to encrypt his message using Maria's public key, and she's going to decrypt the message using her private key. As simple as that. And the contents of that message could be anything, including but not limited to a shared key to be used in a symmetric crypto function. So hash function. So a good hash function has 5 requirements. It has to allow input of any length, and it has to provide fixed length output. That is to say, no matter how long the input, the output must always be the same length. The hash must always be the same length. It has to make it relatively easy to compute the hash function for any input, so it needs to be relatively fast in that respect. It has to provide one-way functionality. In other words, it can't be reversed. A hash function that's easily reversed, a two-way functionality, would not be so simple. And it has to be collision-free. Collisions are exactly why the MD5 protocol is not, why MD5 is no longer used as a hashing algorithm. So a collision in hashing means that we could put 2 different inputs through a hash function and it would generate the same output, meaning we can't then determine reliably what the original value was. That's exactly why MD5 is not used anymore. Let's talk about cryptographic salts. So Attackers may use something called a rainbow table. It's a table of pre-computed values to try to identify commonly used passwords. And a salt is random data that's used as an additional input to a one-way function that hashes data, password, passphrase, whatever. And because we're injecting random data, adding salts to passwords before hashing them reduces the effectiveness of the rainbow table attacks, because the attacker doesn't know what additional random data has been injected before the hash. So digital signature standard. So DSS uses SHA-1, SHA-2, SHA-3 message digest functions. It used to use SHA-1. Generally speaking, SHA-2 is going to be more common now. The SHA-2 is approved with DSS. And it works in conjunction with one of three encryption algorithms. So it would work with digital signature algorithm, or DSA, an RSA algorithm, or elliptic curve DSA. So public key infrastructure. So this is the certificate server that you'd see commonly in an enterprise environment. So certificate authorities, are sometimes called certification authorities, generate digital certificates that contain public keys of system users. Every certificate has a public key and a private key, to be clear. And the users can distribute the certificates to people with whom they want to communicate. And the recipients verify a certificate using the CA's public key. So that's how one can establish a chain of trust back to the issuing certificate authority. So it goes all the way back to the root certification authority. So in PKI, you'll sometimes have tiers of servers, and you'll have an issuing authority, but you'll have a root authority at the base of the infrastructure. Oftentimes that root authority is maintained offline, but it's using asymmetric in that case. Certs are used for web, network, and email security pretty commonly. So in fact, let's talk about web, network, and email security. So on email, pretty common standards for encrypted messages include SMIME and pretty good privacy. On the website of the house, the de facto standard is HTTP over TLS, Transport Layer Security, which has largely replaced the older SSL standard that was in use for a lot of years. Then on the network side, the IPSEC protocol is a pretty standard framework used for encrypting network traffic. You may actually see a bit additional in terms of questions on IPSEC. So let's talk about IPSEC at some greater depth here. So IPSEC is a security architecture that supports secure communications over IP. And it establishes a channel in one of two modes, transport mode or tunnel mode. And it can be used to establish direct communication with computers over a VPN. So I've seen IPSEC used between computers without a VPN. VPN is a very common use of IPSEC, though. The Windows operating system has capability to do IPSEC between computers without a VPN, but you can also establish a VPN. And it uses one of two protocols, authentication header and encapsulating security payload. All right, common cryptographic attacks. Just a couple here you should be familiar with for sure from Domain 3. Brute force attacks, which are attempts to randomly find the correct cryptographic key. So it's just using brute force of computing power with known plain text and chosen ciphertext. But it requires the attacker to have some extra information. There's a meet in the middle attack, which exploits protocols that use 2 rounds of encryption. So it's going to exploit some weaker protocols, and it requires the attacker to know something, somewhere around at least 8 bytes of a message. So if an attacker knew the parties involved and weaker protocols were in play here, a meet-in-the-middle attack might be possible. But it uses, looking for those 2 rounds of encryption would be the key I'd remember for the exam in case this comes up. Man-in-the-middle attack, you'll hear a lot more about. This fools both parties into communicating with the attacker in the middle instead of directly with one another. So each side actually thinks they're communicating with one another, but instead they're communicating with the man in the middle. And a birthday attack is an attempt to find collisions in hash functions. And remember, a collision in a hash function is when a hash function can receive 2 different values but generates the same output. That's a collision. And then a replay attack is an attempt to reuse authentication requests. So basically, to get the hashed output of the authentication request and to present that. So that's actually pretty common. So digital rights management, you hear this a lot in the entertainment world. So it allows content owners to enforce restrictions on the use of their content by others. So this used to be a big deal in the entertainment world with music back in the day. It's occasionally found in the enterprise protecting sensitive information stored in documents. But the entertainment content is where DRM was always a big discussion, and nobody was ever very happy about it. So let's talk about symmetric algorithms. If you haven't watched my video on memorization techniques for CISSP, you'll get a taste of them here. So I like to break my cryptography down in a process called chunking. So I start by breaking it down to the types of algorithms I need to remember, because this is the most technical topic on the CISSP exam, and it's a big topic. So let's look at symmetric algorithms here. So you need to remember these. You need to know the block size. I try to remember the key size as well, and remember, symmetric from asymmetric. So looking at this table, I see I have a big chunk of algorithms here that have a 64-bit block size, including Blowfish, the DES family, the RC 2 through 5. So one of the tricks I use here, so I tie Blowfish and Skipjack together. I remember that they're both 64-bit because Blowfish and Skipjack are both fish. Okay, you're asking what the heck is a skipjack? This is a skipjack. It's a tuna. I've lived near the coast many times, so I happen to know that. And because I know Blowfish and Skipjack are both 64-bit block size, remembering two fish is easy for me, because one fish times two is two fish, right? So that's 128. So two fish is going to be a little more advanced in that respect. And I know that AES is used commonly in the enterprise, so that's advanced as well. So I just kind of tie those together, that the advanced family has a 128-bit block size. And RC5 has 3 different options there, but I remember that the greatest is the 128. So then you just half that and then half again to get your 3 RC5 algorithms. And then streaming, doesn't have the block size, right? It's doing it piece at a time as it streams. Okay, hash algorithms. We've talked about these a lot today, right? So these are easy to break down. So I break the MD5 family down. So that's message digest, MD2, 4, and 5. All have a hash value of 128. Also notice that none of those are still in use. Remember I mentioned MD5, which is the newest of the 3 you see there. None of those are still in use. They were replaced by multiple other functions. And then you have the SHA family, and the SHA family is easy to remember here because this is secure hash algorithm. So you'll notice that with the SHA family, that the name maps to the hash value length. So all of those SHA 224 through 512, these are SHA-2 variants, and essentially the hash value shows up in the name, and SHA-1's not really in use anymore, but the SHA-2 family are still actively used. So make sure you're going to break out the MD family and the SHA families and remember those. The 3 major public key cryptosystems. So you have RSA, which is probably the most famous. It was developed by 3 folks back in the 1970s. You have El-Gamal, which is actually an extension of Diffie-Hellman key exchange, and it depends on modular arithmetic. So with RSA, I tie RSA back to to prime numbers. So RSA involves the difficulty of factoring the product of prime numbers. Diffie-Hellman relies on modular arithmetic. It's less common than RSA in the last few years, but El-Gamal is based on Diffie-Hellman. And then elliptic curve depends on the elliptic curve discrete logarithm problem. And it's going to provide more security than other algorithms when both keys are of the same length. But RSA, I think, is the most famous of these and the most likely to come up on the exam. But try to kind of tie some of these key facts about these 3 into your head so you can pick the right one out should a question come up. So digital signatures. So digital signatures rely on public key cryptography and hashing functions. So digital signatures have to use SHA-2 nowadays. And there are 3 currently approved encryption algorithms for digital signatures. You've got DSA, you've got RSA, and you've got elliptic curve DSA. All right, asymmetric algorithms. So we just touched on RSA, El-Gamal, and ECC, and remember El-Gamal is based on Diffie-Hellman key exchange, right? So this is a small table to memorize. I didn't give you much in terms of memory devices here because it's pretty small. There are a couple of angles around the cryptographic algorithm types that we didn't cover in Domain 3 that I think could prove important in your exam performance and your ability to get to the right answer. So let's have a look at those now. Now, to really help you filter down to the right answers on the exam, I want to unpack some differences and common uses of the different types of cryptography. So let's start with hashing versus encryption. So how is hashing different from encryption? Well, encryption is a two-way function. What is encrypted can be decrypted with the proper key. Now, on the other hand, hashing is a one-way function that scrambles plain text to produce a unique message digest. It takes variable length content and produces fixed length output. And if properly designed, there's no way to reverse that hash. It's a one-way function by design. So let's talk about common uses. So how are these different algorithm types used? Well, symmetric is typically used for bulk encryption or encrypting large amounts of data, essentially. And since there's a shared key, that's going to be a weakness because key exchange is challenging. Now, asymmetric, on the other hand, is used for distribution of symmetric bulk encryption keys. That shared key, that's one use. So in that sense, we could use symmetric and asymmetric together in that asymmetric can be used for that exchange of keys and symmetric can be used for the heavy lifting of the bulk encryption. And then identity authentication via digital signatures and certificates. You'll hear about both of those, no doubt, on the exam. And when we can verify that a message has come from a source beyond any shadow of a doubt, that's non-repudiation, right? Proving that a message came from a particular source and no other. And asymmetric is going to play a role in non-repudiation. Well, digital signatures will factor, right? Hash functions can be used to verify digital signatures, generation of pseudo-random numbers, integrity services, verifying data integrity. If we hash the data before and after encryption, if the hash matches, then we know that our data is intact, right? It's authentic. It hasn't been modified in any way. So just from this very simple single slide, you can see how these 3 areas of cryptography can be used together in a hybrid approach to produce a more secure, powerful end result. And to really seal the deal here, let's do some quick comparisons in a table between the algorithm types. So we know a hash needs no key. It's a one-way operation. We know symmetric operates on a single shared key. We know asymmetric is going to have 2 or more keys, public and private, and the number depending on the number of parties. Recommended key length from NIST, I haven't checked this in a while, but we can look at the algorithms we've studied here and know that these are pretty solid. So a hash 256-bit with symmetric 128 bits being the low water mark. Yeah, so I know right off the top of my head, AES is a common example there, and AES has a 128-bit key. RSA is a common asymmetric algorithm. SHA are our common, the SHA family are common hash algorithms. SHA, secure hash algorithm. Speed, our hashing algorithms and our symmetric cryptography where we have a single shared key are going to be fast, and asymmetric by comparison will be relatively slow, which is why we don't see it used typically for bulk data encryption. Complexity, hashing and symmetric cryptography are going to be in the medium range, and then asymmetric is going to be highly complex by comparison. The effect of key compromise. Well, when we're using a single shared key in the symmetric world, both the sender and receiver are in trouble, right? On the asymmetric side, it's a loss only for the owner of the asymmetric key, and then this just doesn't matter in hashing. Key management and sharing. Well, we mentioned one of the weaknesses of symmetric algorithms is sharing a key. Sharing that key is challenging, right? With asymmetric, we have a secure means to exchange the keys, as we talked about earlier in this session. And then finally, a few examples here. You've seen these in the tables before. I wanted to throw them here again. That's all for our cryptography drill down for the CISSP exam. If you're getting value out of these sessions, do give us a comment and a thumbs up. It really helps with the YouTube algorithm. Look forward to seeing you in the next video. So until next time, be well and stay safe.